I had my deep emotion for the death of Nelson Mandela. And in this year that we carried out the evaluation, his presence and legacy was very important and always evident in the policy processes that we were assessing. That said, the evaluation will be structured in two parts. The presentation will be structured in two parts. The part one is mainly dealing with the findings of the evaluations, and the part two is mainly dealing with the conclusions and recommendations. We will have a break after the part one, allowing questions and clarifications, and then we will have a deep discussion after part two on the overall presentation. Let's start with some elements of the context that characterize the EU South Africa program with budget support. South Africa is a middle-income country in which budget support, of course, has a specific feature. ODA in South Africa is only 1.3% of the national budget. And there are two pillars that characterize this context. On one side, since the beginning of the period is 2000-2011, we have a strong position of the government to stress the ownership of the ODA, and the government has created a specific fund in which the funds from ODA should be channeled, and the scope should be mainly support the policy innovation. So there is a very strong position elaborated in the international cooperation strategy since the early 2000s, and then renovated with a couple of documents all over the period. Then on the other side, the other pillar of which characterizes the relationships between the two countries is the overall partnership framework, which started with the TDCA. The TDCA is drafted and agreed upon in 1999, and then it is ratified in 2004. But already since the beginning of 2000, its principles are operating. The TDCA has evolved then, produced then the South Africa-EU strategic partnership. South Africa is one of the 10 countries in the world which has a strategic partnership with the EU, and the strategic partnership has a joint action plan. It was launched in 2006, and the joint action plan specifically says that the objective of South Africa and EU development cooperation is the exchange of know-how, the knowledge sharing process in view of playing also a joint role at international level. So this is a very strong specificity, which affects, of course, the budget support, both in terms of opportunities and in terms of objectives. This is an overview of the programs which were part of the evaluation. We have the first line, the first lines are in pink, are related to employment and private sector development. The second lines second group of lines in blue are related to governance support programs. Then we have some programs on health and primary education, and we have some programs on urban development. And that's all. On the top of this figure, you can see the different periods, the pre-TDCA, the TDCA, and the EU-South Africa Strategic Partnership. This periodization is very important because, of course, in the different periods, different aspects have been emphasized. Just few words on the approach that have been mentioned, the three-step approach. This approach substantially combines two methods of evaluation. A contribution analysis to identify the contribution provided by budget support to the policy processes and service delivery process, and a policy assessment analysis which aims at identifying the achievement of results which were established in the which were agreed upon in the financial convention, and the way these achievements have been pursued and obtained, and which policies are responsible for the achievement of these results. So a third step which combines the two and see if the policies that were supported by budget support have had a role in the determination of the results. This is a way of distinguishing the responsibility, because the government and the society are responsible for the development results, whilst budget support and the aid in general is responsible for contribution to policies and action of government and civil society. So this has been very useful, because it has allowed us to go in depth in analyzing the results of the development results for three sectors which have been selected. Of course, we needed to select a number of priority sectors in which to carry out this step 2, and which were private sector development, water supply and sanitation, and governance sectors, which are the three pillars of the development cooperation between South Africa and EU, economic, social, and governance. Based on this methodology, we have drafted a number of EQs. Some of them relate to the step 2, some of them relate to step 1, and then so this has allowed us to address specifically all the issues with the context being considered in both the steps. The process, you know, the process is relatively standard. We have a data collection phase, we have a validation phase, we have a synthesis and dissemination phase. Sorry, I would like to. So let's try to give a look to the overall assessment first. We have an overall conclusion. This has been shifting to budget support at the end of the 90s, has been a coherent decision, and has produced an overall positive experience. In terms of contribution of budget support has mainly contributed to the experimentation and innovation in the policy process, with a focus on poverty reduction, employment development, and service delivery in the poorest areas. The policies supported by budget support have contributed to significant development outcomes, especially in the three sectors which have been examined in depth. And then the opportunities provided by the comprehensive EU strategic partnership have been only partially used until now, because they have initiated to be used in the second phase, but still the full development of the opportunities which are available should be exploited in the future. Let's see the main findings in terms of financial inputs contribution. Well, here you can see that the introduction of budget support in the early 2000s has contributed to a strong increase of the participation of EU in the Reconstruction and Development Fund. So the EU is the one which has channeled most of its resources through the Reconstruction and Development Fund, whilst the average of the cooperation is much slower. And this is mainly due to the introduction of budget support. So budget support has contributed to strengthen the ownership of the government, because the Reconstruction and Development Fund is strongly controlled and owned by the government and integrated with the budget. Here we can see, we want to see, of course, the contribution of budget support to the budget as such is very minimal and it's difficult to catch. So we have decided to measure the weight of budget support compared to the additional expenditure. So the additional expenditure is a figure which is considered by South Africa and includes new allocations from the year 1 to the year 2, unspent money from the year 1, and contingencies. So this is the growth of the budget. This is the growth of the additional expenditure. And, how budget support has contributed to this additional expenditure? In the average, budget support has been 1% of this additional expenditure. But if we consider some sectors, it has been all over the period a significant part of this additional expenditure. Because, for instance, in the governance sector and in the private sector, and in the private sector, it has been around 7-8% of the overall additional expenditure over the period. But if we consider the specific years of budget support allocation, we see that the percentages are very high. So that means that they have created a strong opportunities for these departments on several periods. And here we have the example of the private sector, here we have the example of the governance sector, and here we have smaller examples in the health and education. So we, with the support of the specific units, we have concluded that budget support has contributed to create an opportunity for the departments in the targeted sector to experiment, to launch, and to test some policies that were considered within the department, that were elaborated partly within the department, but didn't have a push in terms of budget because there were other priorities in the countries. And so budget support has created an opportunity to test these policies. And most of these policies, we will see then, if successful, have been mainstreamed and integrated in the main budget. So it has played the role of a sort of startup fund, if you want, not for enterprises, but for policies. On the other side, in terms of contribution to PFM, budget support has not provided a strong contribution to PFM because it has assumed that PFM was relatively sound, especially at national level. And it has, so PFM has been mainly a condition for budget support instead of being, as in most countries, an output of budget support in terms of consolidation. But budget support on the other side has contributed to improvement of PFM at sectoral level and has acted in complement with a financial management improvement program financed by the EC. So it has not been an area neglected. Let's come now to the non-financial inputs. Before going into the non-financial inputs, we must give a look to the architecture of the dialogue, which is the consequence of the TDCA and the strategic partnership. It's a very complex architecture. It's a very ambitious architecture also, which includes a pillar which is development cooperation. Development cooperation includes annual consultation, but includes also specific interventions, specific dialogue tables that may be open under development cooperation. Then you have other dialogue tables that can interact with development cooperation teams. So this is a very strong architecture of dialogue that of course must be operational. So it must be actually linked with the budget support operations, and this has been tried especially in the second period of our programs. If we look at the policy dialogue, we see that policy dialogue has acted in two different ways. In one way, it has acted in all the programs, and it has been strong since the beginning. And this is the identification of the sectors. This is the establishment of performance assessment framework, the assessment of key performance indicators, and so on and so forth. In many sectors, this dialogue has been very strong. In water, in urban development, in employment, and in governance. But policy dialogue has had also a different dimension, a bit wider dimension, including strategic dialogue and using also the opportunities provided by the strategic partnership. This has been the case in the second part of the period, and this has regarded specifically health and governance. In this dimension has been very, very important, for instance, in case of health, where a program, a very innovative program regarding a different way of service delivery in the poorest areas with the involvement of civil society, has been combined with a consultation on the identification of the best models for health insurance in South Africa. And this consultation has brought the participation of various expertise from different parts of the EU member states and other parts of the world. And from the discussion and the work around these different models, the government has identified a specific model to be applied in South Africa, and this has been combined with the practical experimentation in the field. So similar things apply in governance, for instance, and in other programs, but not in employment and education, which are very recent programs, and they do not include this kind of wider exchange of know-how. Whereas it would have been very interesting in this case. Similar considerations may be done for the capacity development components. All the programs have very strong capacity development components based on the mobilization of national technical resources. This is water, employment, etc. And also the involvement of civil society, especially in justice and health. Some programs have also the inclusion of capacity development component in terms of exchange of know-how, and this is the case of health, and this is the case also of an employment program where this kind of expertise has been incorporated to allow comparison of models, comparison of approaches, which is very interesting in a country like South Africa, which is a middle-income country and has to define new policies and new strategies in different fields. So, the financial inputs and the non-financial inputs have operated in different ways in different programs. The role of funds has been always very important in creating the opportunity for testing and launching new approaches. The role and the quality of dialogue has depended upon the situations and the context. In some areas it has been very strong, in other areas it has been a bit weak. And especially the level of dialogue has been very much differentiated, because in most programs it has been a program level dialogue. In some programs it has been a strategic dialogue relatively effective. Some examples. We have a program of innovation for poverty alleviation. This has been very successful. It has experimented these different forms of sophisticated technologies, but affordable and manageable, applied in the very poor areas, including connection of schools to internet and distance learning, including technology for agricultural processing, etc. The success of this program has brought the government to mainstream to create a fund for innovation in the economic cluster, so to mainstream this innovation approach in all the economic cluster. Risk Capital Fund, this has been a combination of funds and know-how, because it has been implemented through the contribution of the EIB, which has provided its know-how developed especially in the Eastern European countries. And as a consequence of this program, a permanent facility run by the Industrial Development Corporation has been established to finance small and medium enterprises with risk capital. The Primcare, the funds have created the opportunity, but to test this new approach of service delivery through CSOs in different areas, and through the use of local practitioners, which was absolutely new in South Africa. But at the same time, the know-how exchange provided by the strategic partnership has allowed an expansion at a strategic level of this experience with the confrontation of the models for health insurance, for health regulation policies, and a number of areas which have been in large part developed by the ministry and transformed in policy choices. Access to Justice is a very important program for which the funds have been fundamental, because the Ministry of Justice was an underfunded ministry and had the opportunity to test this new approach which involves CSOs in delivery of justice services in the poorest areas. And the result of this program is a bit the result of a very long history of trust and cooperation between EU and the Ministry of Justice since the period, the pre-apartheid and post-apartheid period, in which the EU had consolidated very strong links with specialized CSOs, and so the EU was the right partner to discuss with the government the shape of the program, to find the right partners in the civil society, and to combine and to include in the program, on one side, civil society financed by the government as a service delivery, and on the other side, a number of civil society organizations which acted independently, financed by the EU. So this is a very complex program that you couldn't imagine such a program run through a project. Let's give a look to the step 2. So I said we have addressed the three main sectors: the private sector development and employment generation is this one. So in the period supported by budget support, the employment has grown in the country. This is the crisis, and now the positive trend has restarted without reaching yet anyway the 2007 level. But the unemployment rate remained very high. And even in the period, in the best period, we have an unemployment rate of 20%, whilst before the period and now it is consolidated at around 25%. So we can say that there has been an increase in employment, but this increase is not sufficient to absorb the strong supply of labor force which characterizes the country. And the same may be said for the small and medium enterprise. There is a negative trend which characterizes most small and medium enterprises, with some slight exceptions. And small and medium enterprises are the ones which may generate more employment. So which have been the determining factors, especially the policy and non-policy determining factors of these achievements, which are really mixed? Of course, GOSA employment and industrial development programs have been strengthened. The legal and regulatory reforms in part have been carried out, at least in some sectors, not in the labor sector, for instance. But on the other side, there are important bottlenecks, which are mainly the legacy of the apartheid regime, and which are focused on some areas, which are the labor market and the skill profile of the labor force. Of course, there is also a specific difficult environment for SMEs in terms of infrastructure regulation, especially at the local level. What has done the budget support on these positive and negative factors which have influenced the results that we saw before? Budget support has worked a lot to improve the DTI, the Department of Trade and Industry capacities. It has done something on improvement of regulatory reform. It has done a lot on strengthening the public work programs which were relatively successful, but it has been absolutely unable to do anything on these key bottlenecks. And everyone, starting from us, can say how budget support could have been, could have influenced or contributed to change some very deep bottlenecks and trade-off in the development process of South Africa. Of course, it couldn't do too much, but the use of the strategic partnership could help a lot in terms of knowledge sharing about similar experiences in Europe, in other countries which are experiencing similar situation to South Africa, and this could have been done through the specific tools that the strategic partnership provides. Because the knowledge experience process, and this has it's one of the key points in the Mexico meeting after Busan. The knowledge sharing process it's a sort of new frontier of the development cooperation, because no one has the truth, no one has the solution of a problem, but the discussion, the identification, the knowledge of what happened here and there can provide tools, especially to the emerging economies, to have a more informed political and policy debate and to overcome some ideological contraposition. This has happened already in the health sector, in the debate I told you about the health insurance. And this is something that budget support in the employment area could have done and can do, because it's still working. Here we have the step 3 synthesis, in which I just show you how to read this table. Here we have the development results. Here we have the policy factors that have influenced positively or negatively the development results, and some intensity. This is for the records, because I don't believe too much in these things, but it's something useful. And these are the external, non-policy, external factors that have influenced the development results. Here you have very heavy external factors. In fact, the arrows are very large. And here in the first column, you have the contribution of budget support to these policies, which have been found important for the determination of development results. And here you have also all the synthesis of what has been done, has been written in the step 1. Let's come to the water sector. In the water sector, there have been very important achievements in terms of increased access to water and sanitation facilities. Less important, less significant achievements in terms of quality of the drinking water. And there is a very disappointing result regarding the maintenance and operations of the system, which remain very weak, the infrastructure, especially the infrastructure. But Of course, these achievements are very important, and these are all related to the post-apartheid period, to the period under examination, the first half of the 2000s. Which have been the determining factors? First of all, the big political priority and huge investment that the government has done in this sector in the years between 2003 and 2008, let's say. A second and very important determining factor, especially in the poorest areas, which has been identified through some statistical analysis that we have carried out, are the transfer of the water and sanitation responsibility to local government and the support at local level provided by Massimo Bane. And Massimo Bane was the program supported by budget support. So this has been, the Massimo Bane has been key to accelerate the achievement of the results and to enable the achievement of results in the poorest areas. Not in all the areas, but in the poorest areas it has been a determining factor. Other factors, a new coordination within the sector, but the factors which have been which are mainly related to the bottlenecks and the weaknesses that we have seen before are still low capacity development at the municipal level and a very low involvement of CSO, despite the fact that this was a focus of Massimo Bane. And which has been the contribution of SBS? Well, SBS has contributed to the strategy, first of all, because Massimo Bane was started in 2000, and in 2003 the government issued a new strategy which embedded most of the approaches and lessons learned in Massimo Bane. So it played the role of a very important promotional role vis-à-vis the national strategy. The building of capacity at local level, a number of innovative pilot projects always related to Massimo Bane, because budget support was support to Massimo Bane. So these are all activities that were specifically focused in the support to Massimo Bane. But on the other side, especially in the second phase, the dialogue was weak, and so it tempered the recognition of the weaknesses that were identified already in the second phase of the implementation of the program, especially the low involvement of CSOs. We have carried out a number of consultations with CSOs which have shown that there has been a very a clear difficulty in the mobilization and the understanding with the government, and this was not reflected into the dialogue between EU and the Ministry of Water and the Department of Water. Was not reflected at all, and so it didn't generate any change and adjustment like it happened in other programs. Here we have the synthesis as above. I don't go through because it's written very little, but you can see the summary on your papers. So the last section is on the legislative and justice sectors. These sectors embraces two subsectors. One is justice and one is the legislative support. In the justice sector, the program, there has been a clear improvement of awareness and knowledge of constitutional rights, which was one of the outcomes targeted by the financing agreement. There is an increased access to justice in poor remote areas through specialized courts which have been established and are working with satisfaction of the people. We have collected a number of stories related to these new opportunities created for the poor. And there is a community network of intermediation which has been further developed and strengthened, and above all has been integrated with the main policy of the Ministry of Justice. Which have been the determining factor? The first determining policy factor has been the new approach to service delivery launched by the Ministry of Justice, by the Department of Justice. This approach included CSOs as service delivery in a global framework agreement with the Ministry, with the Department, for the construction of new structures and tools aimed at providing and improving access, awareness, and intermediation. Of course, this is not the only factor, because there are some historical factors which are very important. The actors were ready. The civil society organization, especially in the field of constitutional rights, were very strong. So it was not invented overnight, the capacity of these actors to intervene in this area. And also the Ministry, the Department, had a very strong steering, but this is common to all the programs, to all the successful programs that we have examined so far. What is typical of this program is the fact is the very strong trust built on an historical sequence of collaborations between the EU and the Ministry and the Department of Justice on one side, and on the other side the CSOs involved. So this trust has made the EU it's a very special condition in this sector, a very trustable counterpart which has allowed to participate in shaping the program, which is allowed to give a direct contribution in the assessment of results and adjustments, which is not common in many other sectors. And also this complementary action, because if on one side the EU has provided budget support to finance the main the new action, the new modality of intervention. On the other side, it has financed some specialized NGOs to play a role of stimulus, watchdog, and control in the consolidation process. And this has been also very important. This is the synthesis of step 3. Now coming to the legislative sector, here also we have an improvement of the quality of the capacities of the parliamentarians, which are better trained, which are new oversight skills, and have a potential for democratic guidance, but we know that the actual democratic guidance doesn't depend only upon the capacity of the individuals, but depends upon the political framework. And of course the programs, the government program of institutionalization of the legislative sector had an incidence on the capacity of the individuals and the structures, and an influence on the procedures, for instance, the link between the main assemblies and the civil society, the training of the parliamentarians, and so on and so forth. It could not have a link on the political framework and on the way the parliamentarians are elected, because they are elected in fixed lists, so without a choice by the people. So, but this is something very important, because the possible political evolution finds capacity of this instrument of the people, of the society, which is, this is not a ministry, this is an instrument of the society, and so the fact that it has been strengthened, it's an important outcome. The contribution of SBS. SBS has played a special role in the institutionalization and the creation of this policy support program, because there was a program before SBS, and the discussions around the possible continuation of this program have contributed to shape this idea of a policy support program, of transforming the legislative into a sector in order to be supported through specific actions by the government, and so on and so forth. And so this has been witnessed by all the counterparts, and has been, and of course, the institutionalization is the main determining factors of the achievements that we have seen. This is the step 3 synthesis, and I have finished. Thank you.